Hey guys, so in this lecture we will cover some best practices, or probably a nicer way of me saying that what I will teach you in this lecture is what not to do. So I will refrain from doing these things and I will ask you not to do it when you are coding yourself. So let's get started. The first one that we have is global variables. So avoid global variables. What does that mean? Try to minimize the use of global variables. Usually you have functions, you have local variables, you have block of code that will get executed. Let's say variable x equals 10. Now you have some kind of a function, my function, and you're going to use x here, or if not x, you can use it here. But only declare x as a global variable which is outside the function if it is extremely needed and it is going to be used by other functions or method calls below. If not, move this to a local variable. And this not only includes only for numbers as I showed you for x equals to 10, that also means for any type of data, may it be boolean, string, number, anything that you can think of, array, object, and even functions. Even if you don't need anything to be a global variable, avoid using it. Now, global variables and functions can be overridden by other scripts. That's the biggest problem that you will have. You will not even know when you upgrade x inside here with x equals to 15. So x equals to 15 and your global variable is gone for a toss, because now if you use x anywhere else, it is 15. So that's a very big problem that comes along with global variables. Now, always declare your local variables. The next thing that I would like to tell you is always declare. Why do I say that? All variables used in a function should be declared as local variables. Local variables must be declared with the var keyword, which we already do. You can see that. Otherwise, they'll become global variables. So if you, let's say, have a y is equals to 10, in that case, if you do not declare y to be as a variable here, it means y becomes a global variable. And if you, of course, you're not using a use strict in JavaScript, which is a strict mode, this will end up being your global variable. So make sure you declare variable even in the inner scope. Always try to declare variables at the top. So before you start a function, so the first line should be all variables. For example, first name, last name, and so on and so forth. Age. So that's the declaration taken care of. Now you can start using. So why we do that? Well, it gives you a cleaner code, provides a single place to look for local variables, and it also makes it easier to avoid unwanted or implied global variables, because now you know that you have declared your own local variable. You do not have to use any implied global variables. It also reduces the possibility of redeclaration, because now that all your variables are here, you will not end up, right? So let's say if I'm using age down below, I might not remember that I've created a variable age up in the function, because this function might be a 20 or 30 line function. In that scenario, I might end up having declarations 2 times. So it's always advisable that you put your declarations on the first line. And of course, you can use them later. So if you want, you can just do a first name equals later anywhere. So you can use any of these variables. Similarly, the same concept applies even for a for loop. And I don't know if you recollect it, but the way we declared a for loop was for I equals 0, I is less than 10, let's say for example, and then I plus plus. In this scenario, we had I equals to 0. So for the for loop also, usually when you use I equals to 0, any such variable, make sure you declare it first, variable I, and then you can start using I equals to 0 and then process it. It's a very good practice to do that. The other good practice that I'm going to talk about is initializing your variables. Now, what do I mean by that? So we declared the variables. Let's say, let me take this out and let me just put it here. For example's sake, we have first name, last name, etc. So what I do is I will say first name is equals to empty string, put the last name onto the new line. Let's say last name is equals to an empty string again, put age onto a new line, equals, let's say 0, because we don't have anything. And of course the last line will be a semicolon, but let's add more to it. Let's add comma, and then let's say price equals 0, discount equals 0, let's say full price equals 0, my array equals empty array, my object equals empty object, and then let's close it. So you can see I have, even let's create a boolean too. So is running equals to, let's say, true or false. You usually do a false, and then you can assign the value true on the way. So usually you have, so let's say we have first name to an empty string, last name to an empty string, any integers or numbers to 0. If it's an array, to the open close array. If it's a boolean, you assign it a boolean value. If it's an object, you assign the open close bracket so that JavaScript knows it's an object. So initialization has taken place. The other don't that I will like to tell you is never use the method declare new method or constructors, which is string, number, or for that matter even boolean. So never do something like variable full name is equals to new string, and then you can pass in the string which is Abhay Talreja. Never do that, because a new keyword will cause a problem, and also when you use a constructor it gets your code a little slower. You have performance impact. And the other problem that you will see is if you declare a full name, let's say another variable full name 2 is equals to same thing, which is Abhay Talreja. And if you recollect our string and string method lectures, when you did a comparison, which is if, let's say, if space, when you did something like full name is double equals to full name 2, it will work. But the moment you put a triple equal sign, it will fail, because this becomes a string and this becomes an object. And that's why whenever you have a comparison like this, your if conditions will start failing. So make sure you always use a full name. Everything you use as a string, but do not use the new keyword for any of these objects. Although you can use them, but don't do that, because it will change the type to an object. The other worst thing that you can do is even full name. Let's say I do it as full as new string. Let me create another name, which is new full name 3, and I have a new object. Now even if I do a comparison of 2 and 3, it will fail, because both are objects and you cannot compare the objects based on the contents it have. So be careful, extremely careful, and when you use these methods, always go with this default, which is initialize the string with the string. Do not use the new keyword irrespective. So let me give you a ground rule. Let's comment this. Let me give you a ground rule. When you have to use or initialize any object, use the brackets for objects. Let's see, if you have a string, you have an empty string, use this. If you have an integer or a number, use this as a 0. When you have a boolean, always go with the false. It always works. And of course you can handle the logic later on. If it's an array, give the empty array sign, and again this is an array, so this will be an object, so make sure use this instead of, let's say, new object, new string, and new number, new boolean, new array. If you have a regular expression that you need to give, make sure you do this as your default new regex. And of course, if you have a function, just do a function bracket open close instead of new function and then anything in it. So make sure this has a ground rule for your initialization. The next thing is beware of the automatic type conversions. And we have seen this in the type conversion lecture. If you do not recollect, go revisit that lecture, but you will see insane type conversions. You will expect something and it will give you something. The best example right now I can give you is if you have two string, let's say hello and world, and if you try to subtract those two string, you will expect the JavaScript to give you an error, but it will give you an NaN because it converts both to a string, which is the NaN, and then it does a subtraction and gives you an NaN, which is not a number. So there are a lot of such scenarios. Then the other thing I'd like to give you is use triple equals versus double equals. So again, we have seen that triple equals will also compare the type. So whenever you write your if condition or your conditional statements, make sure your condition includes a triple equals versus a double equal. The other cool thing is when you write a function, let's say you write a function my function 2, because I've already used my function up, I guess. You have x comma y as a parameter. Now you know that x can be 0 or x can be undefined. It's not a compulsory. I may just pass in one parameter. In that scenario, what you do is you do an if y, let's say y is not defined, for instance. Y is triple equals undefined. You know that it can be undefined. In that scenario, you can just write an if and initialize y to something like a 0. What that will do is, if I just call my function with x, let's say 2, it should still work where this becomes 0, the second value, because I'm doing the initialization at the first line itself. So be cognizant of that. The next thing is, let me do this, is end your switch statements with the default. It's always a good practice to make sure you have defaults for your switch. And the last is the eval function. We have already seen that the eval function, if you pass in a string like alert, hi, will work. So I would recommend do not use the eval function. It's just a powerful tool that is being provided to us by JavaScript. It's a good practice to not use it because at times you forget remembering that you've put it into the code. So just make sure that you do not use this. So these were some of the don'ts, more like the do's and the don'ts. And I hope it will make you a better developer. I'll see you in the next class.